The day the diagnosis came, 17-year-old Liam sat in the doctor's office with his mother beside him, her hands trembling as she clutched her purse like it was the last anchor to reality. The words hung in the air, thick and heavy. Terminal, aggressive, limited time. They were the kind of words that seemed to warp the edges of the room, that made the hum of the fluorescent lights louder, the ticking of the clock more suffocating, the entire world smaller. Liam had never thought much about death, not really. He'd imagined college, imagined moving out of his small town, imagined someday finding someone who could see past the shy grin and the clumsy jokes. But now the future was like a window slammed shut. The doctor's voice faded into background noise as Liam stared at the sterile floor tiles, wondering how it was possible to be alive in one moment and yet already spoken of, as though you were fading away in the next. At school the next day, the hallways seemed different. Every sound, every face, every whisper seemed magnified. People didn't know yet, of course. They were laughing, complaining about tests, talking about crushes and football practice. Liam looked at them and felt a strange mixture of envy and tenderness. They were alive in a way he no longer was. Their futures stretched out like endless roads, and he knew he wouldn't be there to walk his own. That night, sitting on the edge of his bed, he stared at the lottery ticket he had bought on a whim. A half-hearted attempt at humor after his best friend Jake joked, "Maybe you'll get lucky in something, man." Liam scratched at the ticket absent-mindedly, not expecting much, and when the numbers began to line up, his heart thudded once, then again. By the time the reality sank in, his hand was shaking so hard, he nearly dropped it. He had won. Against all odds, he had won. Not just a small prize, but the jackpot, a sum so large it felt like a joke. For a fleeting second, he imagined all the things he could buy, the adventures he could chase, but then reality returned, cruel and sharp. What good were cars or houses or trips if you wouldn't live long enough to enjoy them? And that was when the idea began to take root. He remembered Maya, the quiet girl in his literature class, who wrote poems in the margins of her notebook, always talking about wanting to publish someday. He thought of Chris, the football player whose family couldn't afford the Camp Scouts he dreamed of attending. He thought of Sarah, who wanted to be a doctor but worked long shifts at the diner to save for college. One by one, faces appeared in his mind, classmates with dreams that seemed so far from their reach. Liam lay awake all night, staring at the ceiling, his heart pounding not with fear for the first time since the diagnosis, but with something else purpose. If his life was going to end, maybe it could end with meaning. Maybe his last act could be giving others the future he would never have. The first person he helped was Maya. He approached her at her locker, nervous, unsure of how to explain what he was doing. "Hey, I know this sounds weird," he began, fumbling with the strap of his backpack, "but if you had the chance to get your poetry published, would you take it?" She blinked at him, suspicious, guarded, like most people would be when faced with an unexpected offer. But when he showed her the folder he'd prepared, the contact with a small publishing press, the funds already secured, her eyes filled with tears she quickly tried to hide. "Why would you do this?" she asked. Liam only shrugged, offering a half-smile. "Because you deserve a chance." He didn't explain further. He couldn't. It wasn't about recognition. It wasn't about gratitude. It was about knowing that maybe, just maybe, his time wouldn't end in silence. Word began to spread slowly. At first, people didn't believe it. Rumors twisted into exaggerations. Some thought it was a scam. Others thought Liam had gone crazy. But then Chris showed up at school one Monday buzzing with excitement. Because he had just received confirmation for the elite football camp he never thought he'd afford. Sarah walked into the diner one evening with tears streaming down her face because her college tuition had been paid in advance by some anonymous donor, though in the hallways everyone whispered Liam's name. Suddenly, the boy who had been quiet, almost invisible, was now the center of conversations. People looked at him differently, not with pity, not with the awkward glances that often came when illness hovered unspoken in the air, but with awe, confusion, and sometimes even guilt. They wondered why he was doing it. Some asked directly, some avoided him out of discomfort, but Liam didn't care. He walked through the halls with a strange calmness now, carrying the secret of his illness like a shadow. Jake, his best friend, was the only one who knew the truth. One night they sat on the hood of Liam's car, the summer air heavy with the scent of grass and the faint buzz of cicadas. Jake threw a bottle cap across the driveway and muttered, "You're crazy, you know that? Giving away all this money. You could do something for yourself. Live a little before." He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Liam stared at the stars and whispered, "What's the point of living a little when I won't be here long? At least this way, I'll matter. At least this way, something of me will live on." Jake sighed, rubbing his hands over his face. "You already matter, idiot. To me, to your mom. But I get it. Just don't burn yourself out, okay?" As the weeks passed, Liam's acts of generosity grew larger. He funded musical instruments for the band kids whose families couldn't afford them, paid for art supplies, even bought tickets for a group of classmates to see the world beyond their town for the first time. Some people were suspicious, some were jealous, and others grew kinder in his presence, softened by the weight of his unspoken truth. For Liam, each gift was like planting a seed. He would never see the garden bloom, but he took solace in knowing it would exist. And yet, amidst the quiet fulfillment, there were nights when the weight of what he was losing hit him so hard he could barely breathe. Nights when he longed for a future that felt stolen, when he wondered what it would have been like to fall in love, to grow old, to chase dreams of his own. It was during one of those nights that he met Emily. She wasn't someone he had thought much about before. She was just another face in the crowd, someone who blended into the rhythm of school life. But then, during a fundraiser for the drama club he had anonymously supported, she approached him. "You're Liam, right?" she asked, her voice curious, her smile soft. He nodded, surprised. "I just wanted to say, thank you. I don't know why you're doing all this, but you've changed so many lives, mine included." He learned she had always wanted to act, but never had the means to attend workshops. His support had opened a door she thought would remain closed forever. They talked for hours that night, about plays and books and dreams and fears. For the first time in a long while, Liam felt something stir inside him that wasn't despair or resignation. It was connection. He didn't plan on falling for her. He didn't plan on letting anyone that close, knowing his time was short. But love has a way of blooming, even in the most unlikely places. And as days turned into weeks, Emily became the light he hadn't realized he was searching for. She laughed at his terrible jokes, listened when the silence grew heavy, and saw him not as the boy who was dying or the boy with money, but simply as Liam. And that terrified him. Because how could he give his heart when he knew he would break hers by leaving? Yet how could he deny himself the chance to feel alive in a way no amount of money could buy? The question haunted him, even as he continued to give, even as his classmates' futures expanded before his eyes. And then, just when he thought he had made peace with the path he was on, everything changed again. The first time, Liam realized how much Emily had begun to matter to him. It was a quiet afternoon in late September. The leaves outside the classroom windows had begun to shift into shades of amber and rust, painting the town in colors that seemed almost too vivid, as though the world was trying to remind him that life, even fleeting, could still be beautiful. Emily had been telling him about her dream role Julie, she confessed, though she hated the cliché of it. "It's not about the romance," she explained, leaning against the library table with her eyes glowing. "It's about the tragedy of it. Two people who never got the chance to really live, who were stolen from the future they should have had." Liam had laughed then, though the sound cracked in his throat, because the irony was too sharp, too painful. Yet as she talked, her voice alive with passion, he found himself memorizing the curve of her smile, the way her hands danced in the air as if she were already on stage. For the first time in months, he didn't feel like he was waiting for an end. He felt like he was living inside a beginning, but beginnings were dangerous. They made you want more, and wanting more was something Liam had promised himself he would not allow. Still, he couldn't help it. They began spending more time together, study sessions that turned into long walks, walks that turned into shared secrets under the stars. Emily wasn't naive. She noticed the shadows under his eyes, the way his hands sometimes trembled, the way he brushed off questions about the future. But instead of pressing, she simply stayed, her presence a quiet constant, never demanding more than he could give. With her, silence was never heavy. It was a space where he could breathe. Meanwhile, the ripples of his choices spread wider. The school began to feel different, almost lighter. Dreams that had once been whispered with resignation were suddenly pursued with boldness. The art room overflowed with projects. The football field buzzed with new opportunities. The music hall echoed with instruments that hadn't been there months before. Teachers noticed too, their eyes softening when they looked at Liam, though they never said anything directly. It was as if the whole community had become part of an unspoken agreement to let him do what he was doing, without questioning it too much, without forcing him to explain why. And Liam, for his part, found a strange comfort in the rhythm of it all. Each check written, each dream funded, was like a heartbeat, a way of reminding himself he still had something to give even as his time ticked down. Jake, of course, was less impressed by the sudden shift in school culture. "You've turned into some kind of legend, man," he muttered one day as they sat in the bleachers after practice, watching the sky dim into twilight. "People whisper about you like you're some saint, but they don't know the truth. They don't know what this is costing you." Liam kicked at the gravel beneath his shoes, unable to meet his friend's gaze. "It's not about what it costs me. It's about what it gives them," Jake snorted, though his eyes were glassy. "Yeah, well, I just don't want to be around when you finally collapse from carrying all this weight." And yet, despite Jake's warnings, Liam couldn't stop. Part of him wondered if he was addicted, not to the money, not to the act of giving itself, but to the sense of mattering. Every thank you note, every tearful smile, every story of a door opening because of him made him feel like his life wasn't just ending. It was building something. That mattered more than anything. Until Emily. Until the night she kissed him under the oak tree behind the school after rehearsal, her lips trembling against his, her eyes searching his as if asking for permission to want him. And in that moment, Liam realized he was no longer giving just for others. He was giving because he wanted to be remembered, not as a boy who died too young, but as a boy who loved deeply, even if only for a short time. But love complicated everything. The deeper he fell, the harder it became to keep his secret. Emily began to ask questions about why he never talked about next year, why he flinched whenever she spoke of the future, why sometimes he looked at her like she was already a memory. One evening, sitting on her porch steps, she pressed him softly, her hand brushing his. "Liam, why are you always saying you won't be here? Why do you look at me like you're already gone?" He opened his mouth, closed it again, his throat aching with words he couldn't bear to speak. Finally, he whispered, "Because I don't want to hurt you." She frowned, tears welling in her eyes, but she didn't push. Instead, she leaned her head on his shoulder and said, "You already don't get it. You could never hurt me by being here." The ache inside him grew sharper after that night. How could he let her love him when he knew what awaited? He tried to pull back, tried to convince himself it was better to let her drift away. But every time he saw her smile, every time she laughed at something ridiculous, he was pulled back in. He thought of Shakespeare's Juliet again, of stolen futures and inevitable tragedy, and wondered if maybe, just maybe, the tragedy was worth it, if it meant having this. Then came the doctor's call. It was late October, the wind cold enough to sting, when his mother appeared in the doorway of his room, her face pale, her eyes wide. "Liam," she said softly, "we need to talk." He followed her downstairs, his heart pounding with the dread he had grown used to. But what she told him was not dread, it was confusion. The hospital had reviewed his case, rerun tests, brought in new specialists. The diagnosis, they now believed, had been a mistake. His condition was not terminal. He wasn't dying. He had time. The words hit him like a blow, not with relief, not with joy, but with something far messier. He should have been elated, grateful, ready to embrace the future he thought had been stolen. But all he felt was a crushing wave of panic, because everything he had done, the money he had given away, the futures he had funded, was built on the certainty of his own end. Now that end had been taken back. He was left standing in the wreckage of choices made with finality. He wasn't supposed to live long enough to face the consequences, but now he would. And for the first time, Liam wasn't sure if he could carry it. That night he lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the same ceiling he had stared at months before, when he first decided to give everything away. Only this time, the weight on his chest wasn't despair but guilt. What had he done? How would he explain to his mother that the money, their security, their future was gone? How would he face his classmates, who now looked at him like a hero, when he wasn't dying, when he was just a boy who had squandered everything? And what about Emily, who had kissed him like he was her only tomorrow? How could he tell her that the story he had built, the reason for all his choices, was no longer true? He turned over in bed, pressing his fists to his eyes, and for the first time since the diagnosis, he wished he hadn't won the lottery at all. Over the next days, the world seemed sharper, crueler. His classmates still smiled at him, still whispered his name like it was wrapped in reverence. Emily still looked at him with a softness that made his heart ache. His mother, though, had begun to unravel. The financial reality was setting in. The winnings had been drained in large swaths, distributed with little thought for sustainability. Liam tried to reassure her, tried to explain, but the truth only deepened her worry. "You gave it all away," she said one night, her voice breaking. "You gave away everything when you thought you wouldn't be here. But now you are. And what are we supposed to do?" The guilt gnawed at him like a shadow he couldn't shake. He walked through school with a weight no one else could see, torn between relief that he would live and despair at the mess he had made of that life. The boy who had been a legend was now just a boy trapped in a secret that could shatter everything. And the secret couldn't stay hidden forever. For days, Liam walked through school like a ghost haunting his own life. Every laugh in the hallways, every conversation about dreams suddenly within reach, every grateful glance from classmates who owed their chances to him felt like a dagger pressed just under his ribs. They didn't know the truth. They didn't know that the generosity they praised was born not of selfless foresight, but of despair. Of a boy convinced he wouldn't live long enough to need anything himself. And now, with his diagnosis reversed, those same choices seemed reckless, selfish even. The actions of someone too cowardly to imagine surviving. The irony burned him alive. He had wanted to matter, to leave behind a legacy, but now he wondered if what he had left was nothing more than a hollow myth. Jake noticed first, of course. They sat in the parking lot after school, the cold autumn air fogging the windshield, and Jake turned to him with that sharp look only best friends could give. "Something's off," he said flatly. "You've been weird. Not like before. This is different." "What's going on?" Liam swallowed, gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles went white. For a long moment, he considered spilling everything, letting the truth tumble out into the safety of their shared silence. But the words stuck, heavy and jagged in his throat. Finally, he muttered, "I'm just tired." Jake stared at him for a long while, then shook his head. "You're lying. You can tell yourself you're protecting people, but secrets like whatever you're carrying, they rot you from the inside." Liam wanted to argue, but the truth of it was too sharp. He just sat there, staring at the condensation running down the glass, feeling himself unravel inch by inch. It was Emily, though, who broke through the walls he had built. She had a way of looking at him that made him feel transparent, as though every thought, every fear, every unspoken word was written across his skin. One evening, after rehearsal, she walked with him under the street lamps, their breath visible in the chilly air. She slipped her hand into his and asked softly, "Liam, are you sick?" He froze, his entire body locking. Her eyes searched his face, wide with worry, and he realized with a start that she had pieced together more than he had ever admitted. He opened his mouth, closed it, then finally whispered, "I was." The word hung there, half a truth, a shard of something larger. Emily frowned, stopping in her tracks. "What do you mean, was? You keep looking at me like you're about to disappear, but you're here. You're right here." Tears pricked his eyes as he struggled to find words that wouldn't shatter her trust. But in the end, the silence said more than any confession could. Over the next week, the pressure built until it felt unbearable. His mother's voice echoed through the house at night, tense with worry about bills and the future. His classmates' laughter grew sharper in his ears, a reminder of what he had given away. And Emily's touch, so gentle, so trusting, felt like a weight he couldn't carry. He lay awake at night, his mind a storm of questions. What kind of person gave away a fortune thinking it wouldn't matter, only to survive and regret it? What kind of son left his mother in debt when he could have secured her future? What kind of boy fell in love knowing the foundation of that love was built on lies? The breaking point came during a school assembly. The principal had arranged it as a celebration of student achievements, but everyone knew it was really about Liam. One by one, students stood on stage to thank Maya reading a poem from her published collection, Chris showing off a highlight reel from his camp, Sarah talking about her acceptance into pre-med. The auditorium buzzed with applause and admiration, and all the while, Liam sat frozen in his seat, his chest tight, his vision blurring. They were thanking him for being something he wasn't. They were building him into a symbol he no longer deserved to be. By the time Emily reached over to squeeze his hand, he could barely breathe. That night, he couldn't hold it in any longer. Sitting on Emily's porch steps, the autumn wind cold against his face, he told her everything. The diagnosis, the lottery, the giving, the mistake, the reversal. His voice broke more than once, but he forced himself to every detail, because she deserved to know the truth even if it destroyed whatever they had. When he finished, silence settled over them, thick and suffocating. Emily stared at him, her face pale, her eyes wide with something between shock and sorrow. "So, all of this," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Everything you've done, it was because you thought you were dying?" Liam nodded, unable to meet her gaze. She drew in a shaky breath, tears spilling over her cheeks. "And now you're not, but you still gave everything away." The hurt in her voice was sharper than anything he had ever felt. He reached for her hand, but she pulled it back, shaking her head. "Do you understand what this means, Liam? You've built your life, our lives, on a lie. Not because you meant to, but because you didn't believe in a future. And now you have one, but..." Her words trailed off into sobs she tried to stifle. He wanted to tell her that it had been real, that his feelings for her weren't built on despair, but the truth was messy, tangled, impossible to separate. She stood abruptly, wrapping her arms around herself. "I need time," she said softly, before disappearing into the house and leaving him alone on the steps, the night pressing down like a judgment. The days that followed were brutal. Whispers spread someone had overheard fragments of his confession to Emily, and rumors began to twist through the hallways. Some said he had faked his illness for sympathy. Others said he had wasted the money for attention. The same classmates who had once looked at him with awe now looked at him with suspicion, pity, or outright resentment. Even the ones who had benefited from his generosity began to keep their distance, as though gratitude had been tainted by the revelation that he hadn't been a saint, just a scared boy. Jake remained by his side, though even his patience was fraying. "You've got two choices," he said one evening, tossing a football idly between his hands. "You can drown in guilt, or you can own it. You messed up, yeah? You made choices based on what you thought was the truth. But now you're here. So what are you going to do about it?" Liam stared at him, hollow and exhausted. "What can I do? The money's gone. The trust is gone. Emily's gone." Jake caught the football, holding it tight. "Maybe. Or maybe you stop looking backward and start figuring out what matters now. You're alive, Liam. That's not a curse. That's a chance." But chances felt hard to grasp when the walls of shame closed in tighter every day. Liam wandered the halls of school like a shadow of the legend he had once been. Teachers' eyes no longer glowed with pride, but with quiet disappointment. Friends avoided him. Conversations halted when he walked into rooms. He was a boy caught between worlds, no longer dying, but not fully living, trapped in the limbo of choices made in desperation. And yet, somewhere deep inside, a flicker of something stubborn remained. He had given away his fortune, but maybe that didn't mean he had given away his purpose. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way to rebuild not with money, not with grand gestures, but with honesty, with love, with the truth he had been so afraid to face. But first, he would have to earn forgiveness. The weeks after the truth came out were the hardest Liam had ever lived through. It wasn't the stares or the whispers that cut the deepest, though those hurt in ways he hadn't imagined. It was the silence from Emily, from classmates who once overflowed with gratitude, from his own mother who tried and failed to hide her disappointment behind tight smiles. He had thought dying would be the hardest part, but in many ways, surviving felt crueler. At least death carried finality. Life demanded he carry the weight of his mistakes day after day. One afternoon, he skipped class and wandered through town, hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets. He found himself outside the bookstore where Maya's poems were displayed in the window, a small collection that had her name printed boldly across the cover. He stared at it for a long time, torn between pride and regret. She wouldn't have had that chance without him. None of them would. And yet the question haunted him. Did it matter if his intentions had been built on hopelessness? Did the good cancel out the lie? Or would the lie forever poison the good? He didn't know. All he knew was that his heart ached every time he thought about Emily's face when he confessed wide with shock, clouded with hurt. That image lived behind his eyelids now, a constant reminder of what he had risked and lost. Jake was the one who refused to let him wallow forever. One Saturday morning, Jake dragged him out of bed and shoved him into the passenger seat of his truck. "You're not going to fix anything sitting around moping," he said firmly. "So we're going to face it, one person at a time." Liam groaned, protesting, but Jake drove straight to Chris's house, then Sarah's, then the art teacher's studio, where new supplies had changed everything. At each stop, Liam was forced to stand there and listen as Jake told the truth about how Liam had given without fanfare, about how his intentions had never been for recognition. Some people reacted with warmth, embracing him despite the mess. Others were colder, grateful but distant, unwilling to look past the scandal of it all. But each encounter chipped away at Liam's shame. He realized that while he couldn't undo the choices, he could own them. He could look people in the eye and say, "Yes, I did this. Not because I was noble, not because I was wise, but because I thought I was dying and wanted to leave something behind." And maybe honesty, late though it was, mattered more than the illusion of sainthood. The hardest visit was Emily. Weeks had passed since she had spoken to him, her absence a hollow ache he carried everywhere. When he finally stood on her porch again, his heart hammered so hard he could barely breathe. She opened the door slowly, her expression guarded, her eyes red from crying. For a long moment, they just stared at each other, the silence thick with everything unsaid. Finally, Liam spoke, his voice hoarse. "I know I broke your trust. I know I built something with lies. But the one thing that wasn't a lie is how I feel about you." Emily's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't move. He took a shaky breath. "I can't change what I did. I can't give back the money or erase the way it all happened. But I can promise you this, if I have a future now, I want it to be honest. I want it to be with you, if you'll let me try again." For a moment, he thought she would close the door. But instead, Emily stepped out onto the porch, wrapping her arms around herself, as if bracing against the cold. "You hurt me," she whispered. "Not because of the money, not because of the lie, but because you didn't trust me enough to tell me sooner. You carried all of that alone, and you shut me out." Liam swallowed hard, nodding. "I know, and I'm sorry. I was so afraid of losing you that I ended up doing the very thing that pushed you away." Her tears spilled then, but when he reached for her hand this time, she didn't pull away. She let him hold it, fragile but real, and in that touch he felt the faint flicker of forgiveness. The road back wasn't easy. Trust, once broken, didn't mend overnight. There were still whispers at school, still side eyes and rumors. His mother still struggled with the weight of what had been lost. But slowly, Liam began to rebuild, not with grand gestures, but with steady effort. He got a part-time job at the diner, working alongside Sarah, scrubbing dishes and pouring coffee, learning the quiet dignity of earning instead of giving. He joined Emily's rehearsals, not as a benefactor, but as a volunteer who painted sets and carried props. He tutored younger students after school, not with money, but with time. And in those small, steady acts, he began to find something he hadn't felt in a long time: peace. The moment he knew he was changing came during Maya's book reading at the library. She stood before a small crowd, her voice trembling at first, but growing stronger with each poem. When she finished, the room erupted in applause. Afterwards, she found Liam and hugged him tightly. "You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself," she said. "Whatever else happens, that will always be true." And for the first time, Liam didn't flinch at the gratitude. He didn't feel the sting of guilt. He simply nodded, smiling softly, because he understood now it wasn't about why he had given, but about what had grown because he did. Months passed, and winter melted into spring. The scandal faded, replaced by new dramas, new rumors, the ever-churning life of a high school. Liam was no longer a legend or a pariah. He was just Liam again, sometimes awkward, sometimes uncertain, but alive. And in that ordinariness, he found something extraordinary. He found love that endured despite broken trust, friendships that bent but didn't break, and a future that stretched out not in grand promises, but in small, steady steps. On the night of Emily's big performance, Liam sat in the audience, his hands sweating, his heart pounding with pride as she stepped onto the stage. She was radiant under the lights, her voice carrying through the theater with a strength that made his chest ache. And when she delivered Juliet's lines about love and loss, about futures stolen too soon, Liam felt tears blur his vision, not because the tragedy mirrored his own story, but because he realized he had been given something Juliet never had: a second chance. A chance to live, to love, to matter not because of money or legacy, but because of the choices he would make from here on out. After the show, Emily found him backstage, her makeup smudged, her smile brighter than any spotlight. She threw her arms around him, whispering, "See? I told you dreams are worth chasing." He held her tightly, his throat thick with emotion, and whispered back, "So is love." And in that moment, Liam finally understood what truly mattered. Not the money, not the legend, not the myth of selflessness born from despair. What mattered was being here, fully, honestly, imperfectly here. To give not because time was short, but because love was long. To live not for what might be remembered, but for what could be shared. And for the first time since the doctor's words had shattered his world, Liam didn't feel like he was waiting for an end. He felt like he was standing at the beginning of a story still unwritten.